This is really special, Brad and David, because I think in the 10 or some odd years you've been working together, you've never shared a stage.
That's true.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, is there some practical...
We did this for you.
Well, I appreciate the gift, early birthday present.
When's your birthday?
It's in like 2 months, but...
It's
Early.
because we don't like each other.
Well, maybe we can start there. Obviously, it's not not a lot of people can say that they've worked with someone for this amount of time. Have you guys ever disagreed on anything as it pertains to XRPL or Ripple in this time? And how have you gone over maybe some of those disagreements?
The only thing I can think of that we've really disagreed on at times is sort of how much Ripple can do. How many projects can we take on? Is it a small number of things that we think are really big, or a large number of things that we think are interesting, but not necessarily, not necessarily world-changing? So this is sort of the scope. And of course, that's evolved over time as Ripple's resources have evolved.
I'll just add, I truly say this, I'm not just saying it because he's sitting here, but I think David Schwartz is one of the smartest people I've ever met. And so it's really hard to disagree with someone that you think is that smart. Like, if I disagree, it's like, okay, I'm doing something wrong.
No, I actually do warn people frequently that I can be very persuasive even when I'm wrong.
He does.
So they should actually be careful.
He has done that to me.
Because if I'm wrong and I persuade Brad that I'm right, that benefits nobody.
But look, I think he's incredibly smart, incredibly passionate. His more recent adoption of trying to be a comedian on Twitter, I'm less impressed with. We sometimes disagree with his... I did call him a number of times, encouraging him to think about things he was posting on Twitter.
My wife keeps threatening to buy me new joke books.
You've got your wife on one side and Brad on the other trying to rein you in to no avail. Let's maybe talk about the evolution of Ripple as a firm and XRPL. How has it changed, right, in terms of what people might think of it and what it's sort of become today?
I think from the earliest stages, some things have remained constant. Very early on, we decided we weren't trying to be a consumer outreach play. We wanted to play at kind of the infrastructure enterprise side of things. And early on when I joined the company, and David predates me by a couple of years, when I joined Ripple, we were trying to do a number of things around smart contracts with Codius, around identity. Just listening to David speak this morning, it's interesting to see thematically how some of these things are still relevant and still omnipresent. But we decided to really focus on payments at the time. As David has suggested, we have subsequently kind of expanded beyond that. We now have, at the time when I joined, we had about 80 people. Now we have hundreds and hundreds of people. And so I feel like we can do more things. But I will say, I think the culture of Ripple, I hope we continue. And frankly, the culture of the whole XRP community, which has just been phenomenal, is like, how do you create small groups who get a lot of shit done, as opposed to, layers and layers, like let's try stuff. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We try again. We built something called Liquidity Hub, I guess 3 years ago, which really didn't play out the way we thought. And some people say, oh, we failed. We succeeded by trying something new in a nascent, exciting space. It didn't develop the way we thought it would. We decided that's not the right place for us to focus. Let's put those resources somewhere else.
Just to clarify, I'm usually on the do fewer things side of that argument.
So what sort of technical impediments do you think the ledger has faced over the past since the origins, and how have you overcome those?
There really have not been that many technical impediments. It's kind of surprising how well these things work technically. I mean, they're not infinitely scalable. There's always fear of security issues, but there haven't really, at least in the XRP ledger space, knock on wood, we really haven't had technical problems. I think the biggest problem, and I talked about it a little bit just a few minutes ago, because of the XRP ledger's design, it's different from other blockchains in some important ways. So like transaction fees are very small because there is nobody who's profiting from it. That's good. It's fixed function, which means you don't have some of the security problems that you have with smart contracts. But the downside is that adding new features is slow. And so like, you know, adding the AMM feature took 2 years. It's great. It came out really nicely, but it would have, you know, other blockchains probably could have deployed something much faster and did.
And Brad wants to do 1,000 different things, so that makes it challenging.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with that.
So, whilst there haven't been that many technical challenges per se, although maybe not being able to move as fast as you would like to is one of them, there have been a lot of just macro and general crypto problems that have trickled down to XRPL and the firm Ripple as well. But those seem to be improving, Brett. Is that a fair take? I mean, at least from a regulatory perspective, XRP is now backlisted on Coinbase and trading. That's good news. But it's not 100% maybe where the industry would need it or want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think as you reflect on the last handful of years, we'll call it 4 or 5 years, there are things that are super frustrating. You know, why did the SEC go after XRP kind of first, if you will? You know, in some ways you look at that now and you say, we're almost at the very, very end of that journey. I think that, you know, hopefully we have resolution. We can't control that now. The judge, you know, will make the decision when she makes the decision. My estimation is sometime before the end of the summer. Somebody asked me, is that the end of August? I pointed out that September 21st is the end of summer. So I don't know, sometime there.
I think my birthday, August 28th, that's the end of summer.
You know what? I'll ask her if we could celebrate your birthday with that. That would be, we'll all celebrate with you.
We'll call the judge.
But look, it has been frustrating. What has been exciting is the momentum that has been building. I mean, look, there are 3 times as many people here as the last Apex. This community is more active, more vibrant, more entrepreneurial. I mean, it's just awesome. Like I see the momentum and the excitement here, and it's just very palpable. The U.S. market remains, frankly, a laggard. You know, the U.S. regulatory environment, even though Ripple is at the tail end of that, and I think it's strange to me that XRP is in such a unique position and that the market hasn't kind of rewarded that. XRP in the US is one of the few things we can say definitively is not a security. With ETH, I don't know how that's going to play out, right? Apparently Wells notices, which is the SEC kind of pre-warning that we're going to file a lawsuit, have been gone out to consensus, well, purportedly, as I've read, maybe on your side as well, to consensus. You know, we know the Ethereum Foundation has received various inquiries. So look, it's super frustrating. And even it's not just the SEC. The United States kind of current administration with Gary Gensler as the head of the SEC has been pretty hostile towards crypto. But look, you asked the macro question. That has been frustrating. I think we're on the largely on the other side of that. And it's the reason why I'm so excited. And hearing David talk about what's going on in the XRP ledger, I look at the next 5 years and what this community may look like 5 years from now, and I get very excited about it.
David, what does that look like from the perspective of client engagement and the penetration of certain products in the U.S. market? Has sort of the shift that Brad described, has that translated into more business effectively?
Not too much in the U.S. market. You know, globally, we get hung up on the U.S. market. It's a small, it's an important, critical piece. Obviously, I'm an American. I would love to see the United States be a hub for innovation in crypto. It looks like the United States, at least, you know, we'll see. But I just want to point out that like business outside of the United States is great. I mean, the regulatory challenges are much, much more tractable. But, you know, Ripple has licensing in, you know, many countries, and we're launching payments products and other things. You know, in the United States, enterprise adoption is much more difficult.
Yeah. Probably tied to some of those regulatory overhang that we're describing. So there's those issues with institutions and maybe financial services firms. From a retail perspective or a consumer perspective, I reckon they're less concerned about Gary Gensler, just more concerned about these things being difficult to use, right? So I was listening to your talk this morning, obviously, as we all were, and I'm curious to get both of your take on how mass adoption occurs, obviously, I think one component is going to be making this stuff easier to use.
Yeah.
I think the fact that Iggy Azalea followed me on Twitter this morning is a good sign for mass adoption. But what else is it going to take?
Well, user experience is super, super critical. You can't, if you have to understand the technology in order to get it to work, there was a time when you had to understand cars to drive a car. You had to understand copying machines to have a copying machine. We have to turn that corner. But I think the other thing is that we need products that meet needs that real people actually have. One of the things that I mentioned in my talk is, like, for most of us, we're very well connected to the financial system, and getting money into and out of a blockchain is not difficult for us. But if you're someone who, doesn't have a whole bunch of money that you can just, send off and not be able to get to for a while, on-ramps and off-ramps are critical, interoperability, like all of those things. But really what it comes down to is just the user experience has to be great, and it has to solve a problem people actually have. It can't just be interesting. It's like, oh, it's really cool that it can do this thing, right? It has to solve a problem people actually have.
One of the things David also talked about on stage earlier today is he had been around in the earliest days of the internet, kind of the internet 1.0. I'm a lot younger than him, but I also was around. Why is that funny?
I don't know. I thought that was
Frank. Shots fired. I was around those days as well, and I think one of the things that really catalyzed the growth of kind of the internet 1.0 was usability.
Yeah.
Mosaic came out as a first browser that evolved into Netscape. That trying to use some of these technologies that predated the browser as we know it. I mean, people can't even think about the internet before a browser. Mm-hmm. But those things didn't exist until I think 92, 93. Mm-hmm. That was the explosive growth. And so I think, again, when I think about the big picture where we're going over the next 5 years, 10 years, I think we are now focused on abstraction layers that can actually, we don't need to know how the technology works. We don't need to know how SMTP works to send an email. Mm-hmm. Why do we need to know how to do things with core layer 1 technologies in order to take advantage of them?
Or bridging and the like. Things are getting better, though. I mean,
for sure.
I think a lot of folks outside the industry or a skeptical person might think that the whole, baseball analogy, first inning, or maybe we're still in the dugout tying our shoes.
Well, I think because we're in Amsterdam, we can't use baseball.
Yeah, whatever sport they play here. Soccer. I'm sure it's a great sport. Soccer
is the safe, except they call it football.
First quarter of soccer or football.
Yeah, they call it football
on the pitch.
They're gonna tar and feather me. No, but in all seriousness. It sounds like Cope, right? That we're in the first inning, or it's still early, but to a degree, I mean, this stuff takes a lot of time and energy. One product that probably has found the best product market fit is probably stablecoin. If you look at the adoption of those, and let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about maybe the new name of the stablecoin.
Let's do that. David made some news earlier this morning. More news that we're going to...
It's like a gender reveal conference. That's why they need both parents.
Okay. The name of the Ripple stablecoin will be RLUSD. I like to call it Real USD, Ripple USD. We're very excited about this. I also will emphasize, as I've emphasized many times, we think this is very much complementary, additive to what the overall XRP ecosystem is doing. Anything we do in mind of how do we make sure XRP is as successful as possible for everyone here. Having, as David talked about stablecoins this morning, having liquidity on chain, having the bridging, frankly, better on-ramps and off-ramps, that's good for everybody. In no way does that take away from our commitment and our desire to see the XRP ecosystem continue to grow.
How did it become XRPL and stablecoins versus, it seems like, at least if you rewind the clock a few years ago, XRPL would have been an alternative to stablecoins, or sort of a reason for stablecoins maybe not even to exist. How did that shift happen?
Well, I think one key thing to look at is just the way the DeFi universe sort of evolved, that you have stablecoins as a key enabler for DeFi. One of the things is that they're stable, and there's some cases where volatile assets are very useful, and there's other cases where volatile assets are not that useful. Like if you're trying to do things like volatility harvesting, you need volatility to harvest. But stable coins, like for pricing things and for for holding things for like dry powder and trading when you don't want to be in the market, you really do need both. If you're going to have an AMM, there has to be at least two assets, right, that people are trading. If you're going to have liquidity, it has to be liquidity between two assets. So you have to have multiple types of asset and multiple asset classes. One of when you work for Brad, you learn these things called Bradisms. There's things that Brad says all the time.
Let's change the subject back to the stock.
No, but
we're not going there.
By the way, my wife has been learning Bradisms to use back at me, and so like I'll be having a conversation with her, and she'll say to me, "I feel like you're trying to manage me," and I'm like, "Oh no," because if you ever hear that from Brad, you are screwed. You rethink all the choices that led you to that position. No, he is, but one of the Bradisms, as he was saying, is or. The power of or versus the tyranny of and. Sometimes things are not alternatives. You can have both of them, and there have to be options. People are going to have different use cases and different demands and needs. And the XRP has a privileged place on the XRP ledger. Through pathfinding, always looks for XRP liquidity first. The auto bridging causes trades to automatically look at XRP liquidity where they don't automatically look at any other liquidity. So XRP is always going to have a privileged place as a bridge asset on the XRP ledger, and stablecoin ecosystem is not going to change that. It's just going to enable more use cases.
So how would you describe those use cases to a potential big ticket client? How would you say, Brad, here's the value proposition of XRP and XYZ use case. Here's the value proposition.
I don't think about it that way. I don't. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. That customers don't care which technology you're using. They want their problem solved. One of Ripple's core kind of go-to-market products has been around payments. You don't go and say, well, hey, this is how we're going to do these things and get into the weeds necessarily. You approach them and say, okay, let's talk about corridors that are priorities. Let's talk about how you're managing liquidity today and how you're pre-funding, and how we can reduce those costs, how we can improve the speed at which that's happening. More often than not, the fact that it's happening through a stable coin. I mean, today, as I think you and I have talked about before, Ripple uses stable coins in our payment flows today. We've used USDT, we've used USDC. Actually, I may not even know. We may have used other things that we don't necessarily go to the customer and say, here's exactly how this is happening. So I think about it really as part of that abstraction we're talking about for mass adoption. I mean, this is on the enterprise side, but they want a problem solved. And one of the things I certainly talk a lot about in the crypto macro ecosystem is we got to focus on utility. We got to focus on problems. If we're just focusing on kind of hype cycles or speculation, that's not sustainable over the long haul. And I think certainly what Ripple's trying to do is to treat it that way, as be clear about who our customer is, be clear about what problem we're solving for them.
So what is the big problem that customers are facing?
Well, I think in the payment space, pre-funding and funds not being available when they need them, holidays, banking hours, those types of problems in the conventional financial space, liquidity being fractured. You use a payment company and you're stuck with whatever liquidity they have access to. One of the earliest visions that I had for the XRP ledger was public pools of liquidity that anyone could contribute to and draw off of. I think in other interesting spaces like real world asset tokenization, there are all the obstacles of reaching customers, and there's all the obstacles of like the administrative overhead. If you're talking about things like fractional ownership, just like the overhead of doing these things in the conventional financial space is just very, very painful. And it's promising that they can launch things like tokenized real world assets on chain markets that streamline all of the pain points that they have, but also that enable access to a much broader base of customers. So like lending, a good example is who can provide the capital for lending. You can be very good at lending, but become capital constrained. Whereas if you could raise capital on a blockchain, then you sort of decouple the lending from the capital provision.
It's actually pretty exciting what's happening with tokenization. It used to be kind of a trite thing to say or talk about a few years ago when they were just tokenizing like college dorms in South Carolina, if you remember. Harbor, I think it was called. But we've come a long way, right? I mean, in your presentation, you really delineated how the growth of the RWA segment is unfolding. And I think that the market has grown since you've come back on stage. Is that an opportunity for Ripple? Are you guys going to be tokenizing money market funds and the like? Is that an opportunity that maybe is missed?
Well, it's an opportunity for the XRPL, for sure. Ripple's view is kind of, look, there's a lot of, David talked about this at the end, there's a lot of exciting things represented by the amazing entrepreneurs in this audience. We're not going to play in every space. We may partner, help catalyze. One of the things you and I have talked about before is seeing more people eat dog food. And, look, we have a big balance sheet. We invest some of that balance sheet. Why aren't we investing in tokenized various types of assets? And in fact, one of the things that maybe we'll talk more about tomorrow, because it's Apex, we announce things as we go, is along those lines. But I think the big thing that's changed around tokenization is, again, one reason to be very optimistic about where we are in the evolution of crypto. The largest financial managers, asset managers on the planet are talking about, whether it's BlackRock, certainly Blackstone, Franklin Templeton, Fidelity. These are, some of the largest asset managers on the planet are actively working on talking about. Larry Fink is, he thinks this is underhyped. This is going to fundamentally change how finance works, and it's going to democratize and give more people access, which is, it really has been the promise of crypto from the earliest days. So it's exciting to see kind of it come to fruition.
Do you think, David, there's anything specific about XRPL that is sort of purpose-built for this use case, for what they're calling tokenizers?
I think there are a couple of things. I think a big one is the lack of sort of incentivized block production, MEV, and there's other types of things that are problematic in conventional finance, like front running, and the ability to sort of filter the transactions, reorder the transactions to exploit other people's order flow. In fact, that's not really possible on the XRP. Front running is possible, but MEV is not possible. It's much more democratic and fair. I think the high speed and the low cost, and I think also just the purpose built. If you have a system that has liquidity in 57 different DEXs and it has 27 different AMMs, and your wallet doesn't understand how any of those things work because they're all different, I think that creates a much more dangerous environment to play in. The counterbalance is that the XRP ledger is fixed function, and so it can't do 400 different things, but it can do 10 different things really, really well. And if those things are the things that people actually want to do, I think it's a really good fit.
One thing that we haven't talked about yet is artificial intelligence and the intersection of AI and crypto. How do you see these two technologies, David, interacting with one another?
Well, one of the biggest ones is enabling development. That's a big one, and customer support. So one of the challenges with preparing documentation and information, there's a huge challenge getting information out to people. And I can write very technical documentation. I can write very simple explainers. But what LLMs can do is they can suck in all of that technical documentation and answer the actual question that you have, like find the piece that's relevant to what you're doing, convert it into a form that's useful to you. And when you're trying to scale up a developer community, that's a huge obstacle that can be addressed by that type of technology. We've also been looking at things like optimizing the movement of assets. So if you have access to a huge set of DeFi options, it's just very challenging to figure out what matches what you're trying to do. There's a lot of other more interesting and exotic use cases, but I think they're pretty speculative at this point. I think it's hard to say where the useful connections are going to be. But I think fraud detection is, I think, also something pretty clear, like pattern analysis. You can do that without artificial intelligence, but the amount of human effort required to keep it current and adjust to new forms of fraud is just very difficult. Artificial intelligence, labeling technologies, they can take things that we've identified to be fraudulent and then find other things that match. Software development can be tremendously accelerated. I don't think think we're going to be able to write smart contracts with AI directly, but I think we can significantly reduce the amount of human effort required. Like all of the basic, 90% of the work in building something is just the framework, right? And then putting the actual functionality in there. AI can really streamline that. I think there are going to be other use cases too. I just think it's a little early to figure out where those are going to be.
Do you reckon that AI is going to do more good for crypto, or is crypto going to do more good for AI?
That's a great question.
I am here.
The tyranny of the or versus the power of the and.
Again,
I think they'll both be good for each other. I think one of the things that, but back in 20 years ago, as the internet was earliest days, it was so hard to predict how these technologies were going to evolve and how use cases would evolve to deliver better experiences. In the AI world, one of the things I think it's hard to predict is you probably will have a future where some AI agents become economic actors. And if they become economic actors, they probably need to have some different type of payment infrastructure than how the world works today, because they're probably, you could imagine an AI agent that is facilitating micropayments that you simply can't do over traditional rails, which I think is where AI actually helps crypto in various ways. You talked about use cases and mass adoption. Maybe mass adoption and the number of wallets on a blockchain will explode because you're going to have hundreds of thousands or millions of AI agents that become economic actors doing, I don't know what.
sibling maybe.
Say again?
Sibling.
I don't think ChatGPT is going to walk into a bank and open up a bank account, right? It's going to have to be something that comes from our space.
So AI agents in the future will all have, they could have multiple different wallets.
Sure.
That could be interesting.
And therefore becomes one of the things David talked about, interoperability, bridging. These are things that are going to matter. Well, they matter today. They're only going to become more important. But I do think about why is XRP and the XRP ledger well positioned in the speed, the cost, the scalability. Those things really are only going to matter more in the future.
It's interesting, right? Interoperability is something that you've talked about a lot, David, and it's so important to the space to overcome, right? Because even if you think about the number of hacks, the most recent downturn that we still saw hacks increase whilst price decrease. And a lot of that has to do with these honeypots, which are the sort of vectors between the chains, as it were. How much room do we have for improvement?
God, so much. That bridge, I call it the bridging problem. We have bridges that work, but there are still a number of problems in the security space. There's two core problems. One of them is just if the bridge is making a lot of money, then it's going to be expensive. It's kind of going to suck. If the bridge is not making a lot of money, then who's going to pay to secure it? What's going to prevent people from exit scamming? There's those kinds of challenges. The other problem is that either there's somebody who can fix a bridge if it breaks, or there's nobody who can fix a bridge if it breaks. If there's nobody who can fix a bridge if it breaks and it breaks, we're all in trouble. If there's somebody who can fix a bridge if it breaks, they can fix it even when it's not broken, and that's not good. And these are very simple ways of understanding like very deep, serious technical problems. And I've met with a lot of people who build bridges, and I can always immediately see where and I ask them the question, and they're like, "Yep, you're right. You're right." And I'm like, I'm not criticizing you. This is a problem that we all need to come up with better solutions to. And there are promising technologies, and many of them just push the problem somewhere else. This is a problem that we all need to solve, but we don't have a great technical solution yet. Everybody's working on it, though. So,
It's incredibly stressful. If you've ever bridged, it's not fun.